You're watching Morning at NTV.
Hello, good morning and welcome back to Morning at NTV. This is Everyday Life. I'm Idris Matu sitting in for Walter. And next to me I have a very special guest, Mr. Morrison Rakakamba, an education expert. Welcome, sir.
Thank you so much.
How have you been?
I'm good.
Well,
Yeah.
PLE, Primary Education System in Uganda. Tell us more about why you're here today.
Well, the point is almost 640, thousand kids or pupils are going to be sitting the primary living examinations.
Yes.
Yeah, first of all, it is to wish them well and their parents and the country.
Well, they need some success cards right now.
And hope that they succeed,
Yeah.
And get the best grades, in numeracy, in proficiency and other subjects, such that they can move on to secondary school, because as you know, education is really the anchor of every country. It's the greatest transformer. And I remember some people also say it, that with education, that the best inheritance that a parent or a country can give to a child is actually quality education. Because
Definitely.
that's the inheritance that as a country, we should give our children. So it's a very special moment, really, for the parents, but also for the kids who need the confidence, who need all the support to make sure that they perform well.
Well, talking about the quality of our education system in Uganda, do you think there is need to change up a few things, especially in the primary sector?
Yeah, absolutely. Why? Because you see, since the Millennium Development Goals, that stressed, access to education, most countries across Africa and across the world adopted universal primary education. And I think for us, almost 8 or so years, we have been under that process of universal primary education, which promoted access, because at that time most kids were staying home, boys and girls were not in school. And when UPE started, I think the numbers moved from 2 million to 8 million.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, starting primary one, which was for me some sort of a revolution. And now kids could come to school and, face the blackboard, face the teachers, learn few words in English. But when the Millennium Development Goals were evaluated, some 2 years ago, and then there was new epoch or a new episode of the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, it was realized that countries focused more on schooling, that getting kids into schools, but there was never really a very serious conversation, a very serious investment on what happens inside the school. So then there was this dichotomy between our kids learning. Kids were schooling, people were in school, but learning was not happening.
What are they learning? And what is the quality of the education
Absolutely.
they're getting?
So now the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN are now focusing, that's goal number 4, is focusing on inclusive learning, inclusive education, quality and inclusive education. So whereas you need to get more boys and more girls into schools, they need to receive quality education. And quality education goes with a number of issues. First of all, teachers must be in school, all the time. For Uganda, I think the unfortunate bit, really, is that 58% of the teachers in this country are absent, from school. So teacher absenteeism is at 58%. And this is I think the second worst, on the African continent. And that has implications for, for how the quality is actually delivered. There is also a dichotomy which is between rural and urban. If you go into urban areas, it doesn't matter whether the urban is Kampala or the urban is Kotido, or the urban is Rukunji, or the urban is Lila. Actually, some schools in Lila, some schools in Rukunji, some schools in Fort Portal. Yeah, in the municipalities, in the urban centers are performing really very well. But if you go to the rural areas, whether it is rural Wakiso, whether it is rural Amudat, whether it is rural Guru, you find that those schools are actually not performing. And I think you've looked at the World Bank report that says, almost, 8 out of 10 kids, cannot count or lack the proficiency in numeracy and language. And a number of reports, have suggested that, from Uwezo, which has been doing reports, every other year. So which shows really that across the board, from the schools, to the parents, to government, there has to be a very, very serious coordination, really, to make sure that we find a lasting solution, you know, to the quality challenges.
You mentioned that universal education was integrated in our schools.
Yeah.
And the narrative has been that in the public schools
Yes.
that have UPE, that
Yes.
we call UPE here,
Yes.
when you compare the quality of education kids are getting from the private schools,
Yes.
you find that some students
Yeah.
come out of primary
Yeah.
when they can't write,
Yeah.
they can't read.
Yeah.
But when you go to private schools,
Yeah.
it has been known that when you take your child to the private school, they will get a better education.
Yeah.
Why is our public schools or the universal primary education failing?
Yeah. First of all, there are a number of factors. I think government may require to get into a conversation on how do we do contractual aspects with the teachers, for example. I agree with somebody, I think somebody from northern Uganda, who mentioned that you see in a private school, I hire you, I'm paying you either 200,000 or 300,000, 150,000. If you don't show up in class,
You're not paid.
you're not going to be paid, and by a stroke of a pen, I chase you. But I think in government, the public service rules don't actually give government or a minister a leeway.
Oh.
Yeah, I actually really empathize with the Minister of Education, you know, the Honorable First Lady. She cannot, by a stroke of a pen, chase a teacher who has not showed up in school 2 days in a week, because the public service standing orders don't allow that to happen. Three, the KPIs, the key performance indicators within the government civil service are really not also are not very clear. So government may need to reflect, you know, on some of those aspects. But most importantly is also the supervision, classroom management. All those are aspects where, you know, the government really needs to invest and reform and retool the inspection aspects. Of course, most of these public schools, some of them are, you know, faith-based founded. So there has to again be a partnership, you know, with the faith-based groups, you know, that are the founders of these schools, working together with government, but also working together with the private sector. You've heard of, you know, public-private partnership in schools.
Yeah.
In Liberia, for example, Bridge is working with the government of Liberia and delivering quality education, and they have, you know, reduced very, very seriously teacher absenteeism from over 50, you know, to like 5%. Kids, you know, learn more and almost at 100%. In Nigeria, it is the same thing that is beginning to happen. So I think there is a wave, you know, across Africa, that public-private partnership, not government going it alone, but leveraging the private sector.
Mr. Morrison, when you talk about teacher absenteeism, teachers have come out several times, and we've covered the news, we've covered those stories here at NTV, and they've come out and said they're not getting paid. So how do you expect a teacher who is not getting paid to stay at school, to do the job? Yeah,
actually, it is. I mean, I respond to that with a bit of contrition.
Yeah.
Why? Because when I was working in the office of the president, you remember there was that big strike by UNATU, the Uganda National Teachers, about expanding their salaries.
Yes.
And it is very important that this country gets salary rationalization, that, you know, all public servants across the board, you know, are actually getting, you know, rationalized salaries, that you don't have, you know, big gaps, you know, that actually, you know, engender friction and people feel they need to be paid better. But the most important aspect just that you have to look at is what is the disparity between the teachers in private primary schools, for example, in Kabare or another place, vis-a-vis the public schools. Actually, the difference is really not huge, and those in private, you know, in public schools are paid a little bit more.
Oh.
Yes, we did that analysis. We did that research when I was in the office of the president than those in the private schools. So basically the issue may not necessarily be in the pay per se, but the issue may be in the management of these schools. You know, we need to really once again think about these parents teachers associations, involvement of communities in how schools are run, involvement of the parents in how these schools are run, support you know, by parents and the community in order to accentuate, you know, the learning for these children. You know, extended school days, you know, more teacher
student
kind of relationship. We need to talk about the pupil-teacher ratios, and I think in public schools you have much bigger ratios in terms of the teacher to people ratio than in private schools. So there is limited attention that a teacher, can give to the child. So those are some of the conversations that must happen. Then the textbooks, because like in rural areas, you find that 10 kids or 10 pupils are sharing one textbook. In private school, you find that each child has his or her own textbook. So making sure that these scholastic materials and learning materials are in these schools is really going to be very, very important. So education sector is at a precipice, if you ask me, because it is now about reforming. How do we translate numbers into the quantity, into the quality? And also, perhaps the other bigger problem is you have 8 million entering, from primary one, but then at the end of those who sit for PLE, it's only 30%. Like now it's only 640,000 that are going to sit. Wow. So, which begs this question: where are all these other kids? So, meaning that there is a lot of
dropped out?
There is a lot of dropout rates. So we need to do a tracer follow-up, and government should really be interested, and working with the private sector, working with the private schools, working with the faith-based organizations, working with the parents. I think
and finding out what is the problem. Is it the teachers?
Can reach a consensus.
Is it the schools? Is it the structure?
It's not really very exclusive. The problem is very much, it's less technical and more adaptive. Like at every stop, there are challenges that have to be addressed holistically. You cannot say government has to do all this. Not at all. It's really all of us, because in Africa we always say that a child is raised by a village, and it remains the same.
Mr. Morrison, thank you so much for coming here, because education means a lot.
It does.
I think we need to step away from talking about these things and getting into the action.
Absolutely.
That's what we had for you today at Morning at NTV Everyday Life. I'm Idris Matu. Have a good morning.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Your Wild and more. All you have to do is renew your monthly basic bouquet subscription of 18,000 shillings. Then enjoy 3 free days only on Star Times. Enjoy digital life.
You're watching Morning at NTV.